Chapter 17, verse 1. Better is a dry morsel with quietness than a house full of feasting with strife. I wonder how much he may have known this from his own experience. He had a house full of feasting. He lived in a mansion. He had 700 wives. Do you think there was ever any strife in his home? There probably was. So he would have rather just had a dry cracker or a piece of 2-day-old bread, a dried morsel, in a house where there's calmness, where there's quiet. He saw that things that people really value aren't as valuable as some other things that are harder to get, like a happy home, a peaceful home, much more desirable than a materially comfortable home, he says, and lavish meals and all of that. In chapter 21, it's not in your notes, but in chapter 21, verse 9, he said, "It is better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a contentious woman." Now, most people like to have large, spacious living area, and would not prefer to live just in the corner of a housetop. In other words, to be restricted in your living space to just a little corner on a housetop. But that could be really more desirable than having a large mansion with a woman who is impossible to get along with, really. And a student of mine observed something interesting once in our school years ago. He saw this verse and he compared it with the verse later in the same chapter, verse 19. Proverbs 21:19, where Solomon said, "It's better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman." My student said, I think I can picture Solomon writing this chapter. He was sitting at his desk, and his wife was there nagging him, and he wrote, he left his desk and went up and sat in the corner of a housetop. And he wrote, "It's better to live in the corner of a housetop than in a big house with a nagging woman." And then she came up there and started nagging him. So he went out to the wilderness and said, "It's better to be in the wilderness." The corner of a housetop wasn't far enough. Now some people might say, well, Solomon's a misogynist, he shouldn't, we men, when we teach Proverbs, need to almost be afraid to talk out these Proverbs about bad women. But see, Proverbs has things about good women, too. And by the way, it has as many things to say about bad men as about, I mentioned that in Proverbs 31, where it says, "Who can find a virtuous woman?" The implication is there aren't many good women. But Proverbs also says, "A faithful man, who can find?" So it's not picking on women. Women and men, they're hard to find, are good ones, okay? And sometimes both are mentioned in the same verse. Or a good woman and a bad woman mentioned in the same verse, A virtuous wife is a crown to her husband, but she that brings shame is rottenness to his bones. There's two kinds of men, two kinds of women in Proverbs. In this case, he's saying if you got the wrong kind of woman, you'd be happier living in the wilderness. It's better. So this is a sort of a catalog of values in a way. And this is really what is more or less at the core of what's godly wisdom. Because all people who are successful in life, secularly or religiously or any other way, just anyone who reaches their goals, can be said to have been a wise person in the worldly sense. They've made the right business decisions, they've made the right investments, they've made the right choices about what education to get and of the options available to them. They could foresee that this one's going to get them where they want to go, and they took the right road. That's wisdom. That's worldly wisdom. And worldly wisdom is usually one of the features of successful people. But godly wisdom, as I said, has this other component. It's not just knowing how to get to your goal. It's knowing what goal is worth getting to. Picking a goal that's worthwhile and then knowing how to get there. And so that's what Solomon's doing here. He's saying, here's a better goal. It's a better goal to have a quiet and peaceable house. It's a better goal to have a modest meal in a happy home. It's a better goal to be wise and have the fear of the Lord than to have great riches in gold and silver. And so these are what some of these proverbs are saying. Now, when it comes to deciding what is of true value, one thing a wise man knows is that the thing that doesn't have immediate gratification but might in the end really pay off is really the thing of greater value. That is, a wise man takes the long view of things, can look down the road and say, okay, I'm going to have to make these sacrifices for this period of time. A man who wants to be a doctor or a lawyer or a professional of any kind, he's going to say, okay, I have to go to school. My friends are going to get out of college or high school, they're going to go right into their job. They're going to be out having a lot of free time. They're going to be independent. I'm going to be in school for another 8 years, another 12 years. And, I'll have my nose to the grindstone, get no sleep. And I'm putting away, what percentage of my life is that? 15% of my life is being spent in school, more schooling, not just schooling, but more. What a sacrifice that is. And yet, those who do it realize that, but after that, I'll be a lot happier with what I've got than my friends who dropped out of high school or who just, who took a wage job or something. Now, I'm speaking in terms of worldly values because I'm not talking about a value I pursued myself, or would. But the point is, a wise man sees that there are times when taking a hit in your immediate gratification now, delayed gratification, is a mark of wisdom, seeking a delayed gratification rather than immediate gratification that's going to be a dead end. So the wise man has to take the long view of things and consider what's it going to be like in the end. And there's a lot of proverbs that tell what the end of a thing is, so that you'll know. If the end is a good thing, then that's a good course to go. If the end is not desirable, then no matter how desirable the path there is, if it's in the end not a good thing, don't go there. To be wise, you have to look down the road and not just a few inches. I remember when I was in high school speech class, one of the girls, we had to give speeches on all kinds of things, and one of the girls gave us a speech on safe driving. And she gave, I forget, 3 or 4 rules for safe driving. And one stuck in my mind because it was, the wording of it was so strange, it just stuck in my mind. You know how strange wording, you remember it better than you remember things that are normal. And she says, one of the rules for safe driving is to aim high in steering. And I guess that just meant is don't look just over the nose of your hood at the few feet ahead of you, but look higher through the windshield, further down the road. And of course, anyone who drives can see why that's true. If you're just looking immediately in front of you, the taillights 100 yards ahead of you might go and you won't know it. But if you're looking way down the road, you can actually, there's trouble down there, so I'm going to adjust now to that trouble down there. It's just wise. It's wise to get as much information as you can about what's down the road, further down, where you're going to be before long, so that you can make proper adjustments now, so that when you get to that spot on the road, it'll be as you want it to be rather than as you wouldn't want it to be. And that's one of the common repeated themes in Proverbs. The expression, in the end, or an equivalent to it, to that expression. For example, in chapter 5, and verse 4, Solomon says, verse 3 and 4, the lips of an immoral woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil, but in the end, she's bitter as wormwood. So, in the moment, there's some pleasure in this pursuit of immoral sex. But it rarely turns out well in the end. Usually, it's got a bitter ending, a sad ending. And Solomon knew that. Solomon and his son needed to know that. But the point he's making is, in this one instance, a sample of a much larger paradigm. That which is immediately attractive, that which is immediately pleasurable, can have consequences at the end that you will bitterly regret. It's bitter as wormwood. In the end, that expression, in the end, is a key expression to knowing what's desirable to pursue and what's not. What is it like in the end? What's it going to be like in the end? The same chapter, Uh, when it says in verses 8 through 12, it says, remove your way far from her. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the cruel one, lest aliens be filled with your wealth and your labors go to the house of a foreigner, and you mourn at last, that is in the end, when your flesh and your body are consumed. So, if you pursue that way, at the end, at the last, you're going to be unhappy about it. You'll mourn. And so, that's not the only kind of in the end that Solomon talks about. If you turn to chapter 14, Proverbs 14, 12 through 13. He says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Even in laughter the heart may sorrow, and the end of mirth may be grief. So, there's a way which when you first consider it, it may have an attractive aspect. It seems right. It might even be a mirthful, a happy pursuit. But even in mirth, the person who hasn't been wise has got to have this element of trepidation, thinking, well, but what's it going to be like later? Even in laughter, the heart has sorrow. Like, I know I'm having a good time now, but hey, there's always tomorrow morning, you know. And it kind of dampens the enjoyment. Because he says the end of mirth may be grief. So, to pick something as a thing to do on Friday night, because it seems like it'd be fun, is not the right reason to choose something to do. Now, there's nothing wrong with fun, necessarily, but what is fun and mirthful and happy can easily be something that you'd have regrets about in the end. And what Solomon is saying is, think about that. Think about later. Don't think about the immediate happiness and gratification. Think about later. There's a way that seems right, seems desirable, seems fun today, but the end of it can be the way of death, can be grief. Now when he says that, I remember when I was raising my kids, when they were young, many a time there were things I told them to stop doing. They were messing around or something. And, I mean, nothing really bad. My kids never did anything very bad, but there were things they were doing that I didn't want them to keep doing. I'd say, stop doing that. And they say, but it's fun. As if that's an argument for doing something. And I can't remember how many times I've told them, fun is not an argument for something. Fun is not a value in itself. Lots of things are fun that are wrong to do. Other things are fun that are right to do. There's nothing wrong with fun, but it simply is inadequate as an argument in favor of any course of action. A lot of people kind of say, well, Steve, you need to take some time off and just go out and have fun. I'm not against having fun. That's why I do it all the time. I have fun when I teach. To me, that's fun. To me, everything I do is kind of fun. But I don't do it because it's fun. Fun is enjoyment is a byproduct of doing something that you think is worthwhile and profitable and good. But if you do something only because it's fun, you may compromise on the part about it being good or profitable. And so think about the end. Is it going to end up in the way of death, in the way of grief, as he says here? If so, then the fact that it's fun and mirthful is not really much of an argument in his favor. In Proverbs 19 and verse 20, it says, listen to counsel and receive instruction that you may be wise in your latter days. Why does he say in your latter days? Well, because a young man often receives counsel against what his immediate impulses are. He knows he wants to do a certain thing, and his dad, his preacher, his wiser friends, they say, no, don't do that. And listen to that counsel. Well, why? they always tell me to not do what I want. Remember when Ahab was asking whether he should go to battle at Ramoth Gilead, which he wanted to do, and all his prophets said, oh yeah, do it. And he asked Jehoshaphat to go with him. Jehoshaphat said, well, look, isn't there a prophet of the Lord here? And he says, yeah, there's this guy named Micaiah, but he always tells me stuff I don't want to hear. You know? I like these prophets who I put bread in their mouth and they tell me what I want. It's like putting a coin in the vending machine to get the prophecy you want. But this guy Micaiah, it seems like he's always saying stuff I don't want to hear. Well, and Jehoshaphat said, don't talk like that. Call him in here. That's what he said. He said, don't say that. But there's a reason Ahab said that. Ahab was that kind of guy. He said what he meant. He didn't want the truth if it wasn't going to make him happy. He didn't want to hear that kind of counsel. When Rehoboam went to his old man counselors about what he should do about the people's request to have the taxes lowered, the old men said, you'd be wise to lower those taxes. If you relieve the burdens on these people and they'll be your loyal subjects forever. He thought, but then I have less money. So he said, I'll check these younger counselors, see what they say. And the younger counselor said, oh no, you got to put these people in their place right at the beginning. You got to set a precedent here. You tell them, my father chastened you with whips, I'll chasten you with scorpions. My little finger will be thicker than my father's loins. And so he took the foolish counsel. Why? Because it was more gratifying to him immediately. But a young man who takes counsel when he is older will say, hey, I'm glad I followed the advice that I didn't really prefer, because it was wiser. I ended up taking a course that has a better end to it. And that is what Solomon means in chapter 19, verse 20. Listen to counsel and receive instructions so that you may be wise in your latter days. Don't just think about now. Think about what you're going to be feeling about this later. I've always thought it was kind of helpful. I don't always do this, but sometimes I do, and when I do, I've always thought it was a good idea. I just forget sometimes. But when I'm trying to decide what to do in a given case, think, well, I've got this choice and this choice. If I make this choice, how will I feel about it 10 years from now? Or better yet, how will I feel about it 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, in eternity, you know? As opposed to if I make this choice. That's the way you really would be wise to consider those things in making important decisions, because there is going to be a 10 years from now. And if you die before then, you're still going to be around to either regret what you did or not. It's great to do things that you'll be on your deathbed thinking, I'm glad I chose that course instead of another. You know, you've heard people say this, that no one on their deathbed regrets that they didn't spend more time at the office. Many people on deathbed regret that they didn't do more for God, or that they didn't spend more time with their children, or that they didn't, cultivate their marriage more. There's all kinds of things which on your deathbed you say, I wish I'd done more of that instead of what I did do. Well, whatever it is that you're going to think that about, do that now, take counsel now, because in your latter end, that's going to be what matters to you more long term in the future. Chapter 20 and verse 21. An inheritance gained hastily at the beginning will not be blessed in the end, or at the end. Now again, at the end is the idea here. You eager to get rich? Going to take the get rich quick route? Why don't you go to Las Vegas? Maybe you can win the jackpot. Why don't you play the lottery? Why don't you do some kind of a scheme to get rich fast? Because then you don't have to wait. No, and you probably don't have to wait very long for the regrets either, because when people win the lottery, you've, I'm sure, heard, as I have, it's fairly well publicized, they follow up on these lottery winners a few years later and see what's gone on, and most of them, they've ruined their lives and their relationships. You just suddenly become a multi-millionaire when you're an ordinary Joe before. It does not enhance your life if it's hastily gained. Now, if you build a fortune through diligence and building your reputation and being honest and doing things that profit people, and your estate builds up that way, that is a different situation, because you are growing personally along with the passing of time as your estate grows, and you can grow in wisdom about things as responsibilities for those things increase. But if you just suddenly have all this money dumped on you, that may be what everyone dreams of. Oh, if I could just win the lottery, that would change everything. It sure would. It probably wouldn't be for the good, though. And if case histories are any indication, it hasn't really helped people. An inheritance gained hastily at the beginning is not usually blessed in the end. Partly because money that's gained hastily is so often not gained honestly, and therefore God can't bless you in it. It is possible to be wealthy and blessed by God too. Abraham was, Job was, lots of people were. But if your aim is to get wealthy as quickly as you can and so forth, then that's the wrong values. And in the end, there's probably going to be no blessing in it, and it could be the worst thing that ever happened to you. Chapter 23, verse 18. Verse 17, 18. Do not let your heart envy sinners, but in the fear of the Lord continue all day long. For surely there is a hereafter, and your hope will not be cut off. Now, we use the word hereafter to mean the next life. But in all likelihood, hereafter just means a time after this. This is not the last chapter right now. There is more to come. And if you envy sinners because they seem to be having a great time, there's more later. You're not seeing the whole story. Fast forward a few chapters to the end and see these people dissipated and sick and with most of their relations broken. And you see, there is an afterward part. There's this present time, and you see the sinners seem to be prospering, but there's more than that. It comes later. There's a hereafter. And you really ought to look to that for your choices of what you're going to do with your now. In the same chapter, verses 31 and 32, it says, do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At the last, it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. In other words, when you're tempted to get drunk is really what it's talking about. Or when you are tempted to give in to alcohol and you're not able to manage it, then it's gonna bite you. In the end, you might enjoy drinking. I'm not sure why anyone would. I've never been much of a drinker myself. I don't mind it, but I've never seen what's so attractive about it. I guess it's an acquired taste, because I can't even stand the smell of most hard liquor, I've never tasted it. But the fact is, some people obviously find it attractive, even compelling, even addictive. But if that's how you see it, if looking at the red wine is something that causes you to give up self-control, then in the end, remember, before you drink it, that you're going to be thinking something about this later. If it's only a hangover the next day, or if it's that you wake up in the hospital and realize that you killed somebody on the freeway. There's another part to this story. Look to the end of the story and decide how you want the early chapters to go. That's what wisdom would do. Chapter 24 of Proverbs, verse 14. Actually, verses 13 and 14. My son, eat honey because it is good, and the honeycomb which is sweet to your taste. So shall the knowledge of wisdom be to your soul. If you have found it, there is a prospect, that is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. So again, the idea of if you find wisdom, and if you relish it like the palate relishes, savory, sweet food, if honey is sweet to your soul, if wisdom is sweet to your soul that way, then there is a prospect, there's a future that you'll be glad of for having chosen wisdom. That's what he's saying, of course. And in verse 20 of the same chapter, he says, there is no prospect for the evil man. So if you're going to choose wisdom or evil, just realize there's a prospect. There's an outcome that's desirable for the wise man, but there's none for the evil man, so don't choose evil. Look down the road further. Chapter 18, we skipped past that, but let's go back to Proverbs 18:13. He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. That is to say, we're always tempted to speak our mind. But before you do, you might ask yourself, do I really know enough about this situation to state an opinion? I might be answering a matter when I haven't really taken in all the facts. I may say something really stupid. I may embarrass myself later. Maybe I'd better hold my tongue until I've heard more, until I know more. And that's, I say verse 17 is similar, because the first one to please his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. The idea is that you haven't heard the whole story yet, if you've only heard one side. Don't answer it yet. Don't give your answer when you've only heard one side. You might have the other side come and give a more convincing case. And so he that answers a matter before he hears it, that's too soon. And later he may feel ashamed. That's the reason I put that scripture in this particular list of things. And now chapter 25, verse 8. Do not go hastily to court. Yeah, this is related to that. For what will you do in the end when your neighbor has put you to shame? So again, going to court, deciding early on that you've got a case or that the other guy's wrong and you're right, being hasty. If you haven't heard the whole situation, you don't know, maybe he's going to put you to shame in court. Maybe you taking him to court is going to turn on you. If you haven't heard the whole story yet, don't give an answer, don't make a decision yet. Certainly don't take him to court over it until you know all the facts, because you go to court, you may be the one that the trap snaps back on. In the end, your neighbor may put you to shame. Once again, it's just a matter of looking ahead, looking down the road. One more example, and then we take a break. Chapter 29, 21. Proverbs 29, 21. He who pampers his servant from childhood will have him as a son in the end. Now, I think what this means is that in a society that has household servants, the master is the complete authority and can treat them however he wants to. And in many cases, as we know in American slavery, but certainly in all slavery throughout history, there are masters who have been very cruel and treated their servants like dirt, have not considered their feelings, have not considered them human, and have just used them like a piece of property. And no doubt have, earned for themselves a great deal of hatred from their servants. And those servants who hate them, no doubt will take every opportunity they can to cheat them, to steal from them, or whatever, when they're not looking, because they don't have any love for them. He says, if you treat your servants right, even though you have the power to do otherwise, if you treat your servants carefully and kindly, then they'll be loyal to you, like a son. It's not only true of servants, it's basically true of relationships in general, but the point of a servant-master relationship is one where there's truly a total power of one person over another person. So he's got all the options. He can treat the person nicely or wrongly and without any fear of any retribution to himself. A master could kill his servant if he wanted to. In most of our relationships, it's not quite that absolute, but but in all relationships, we may have advantage over somebody else in some way. We can treat them well or badly, but the idea is, even in a situation where you've got absolute impunity for treating someone badly, like your servant, there's reasons to treat him well. There's reasons to be kind and pamper him and so forth, because you may want him to be your friend. You may want him to think of you like a father instead of like an oppressor. You may want his loyalty. You may want his honesty in the end. So the basic idea of this is about relationships in general. The way you treat people will curry their loyalty or their disloyalty, their resentment or their gratitude. And so before you treat somebody who's standing before you a certain way, think about, how would I like him to think about me, and how would I like this relationship to be down the line? You know, sometimes I need to choose my words, my actions, my responses to people with the mind that this could be a long-term relationship, and there may be reasons why I will regret not treating this person well. Now, of course, the Christian knows there's especially reasons to regret it, because God will hold you accountable for not treating people well. But even just in the natural, he's pointing out, treating people well, treating your employees well, treating your neighbors well, your children well, your wife, your husband, anyone well. That's going to go better for you later on. And that's what you should be thinking about. Not the momentary impatience or anger you're feeling towards somebody, but the long-term relationship you want to have with them. That's what he's saying. So, in choosing the right values, Proverbs points out some things are better than others, and sometimes it's not intuitive. Sometimes the things that people think are valuable, like gold and silver and big houses, are not necessarily as valuable as some things that people don't think to pursue, like a peaceful home or the fear of the Lord. But a person will choose more wisely if they're looking down the road further and saying, okay, I'm making a choice about something today, but there's going to be repercussions down in the end. What will it be like in the end? So that's what wisdom informs us about, is there is a hereafter. There is something beyond now. And the things we do now will have repercussions on shaping what that hereafter looks like. Christians know that to be true even in the spiritual, in the eternal sense. But the Proverbs are pointing out to a more worldly man that this is true even in the worldly sense. One guy said, the problem with the saying, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die, is that sometimes tomorrow you don't die. Sometimes you have to live with the consequences of having eaten, drink, and be merry. It'd be easier if you did die. But so sometimes you eat, drink, and be merry, and you don't die. And then you have to live with that, you know. So the choices you make now, you have to figure, what am I going to think about this later? Am I going to have regrets? And if you think that way, you're thinking like a wise man. If you neglect to think that way, you're just, like Solomon said, neglecting wisdom, being a fool. Well, we'll stop there.